So thanks for joining this month's Crosschq Check-In, where we bring in innovators from across our ecosystem to share a little wisdom, give us a little insight into their worlds, and help kind of guide us as we craft the future of work in our organizations. I am Mike Fitzsimmons, the CEO and co-founder of Crosschq, and I am so freaking pumped today to welcome Rusty Rueff to our conversation. I think of Rusty as like the talent thinker extraordinaire, and I've often described him to friends and peers as the most interesting man in the world. So without setting him up too much, I do want to give you a quick background on Rusty. So Rusty, in his talent career, was a senior executive at EA and at PepsiCo for many years. He's been on corporate boards for innovative companies like Glassdoor and HireVue. In his spare time, he was the national co-chair of Obama's Tech Foundation, as well as supporting Biden's election campaign. So he has fascinating perspective from that side of the house. In addition to that, I'd love to mention that Rusty was once a DJ, which is pretty cool, and also an author of a great book, Talent Force, if you have the time to read it. So amongst other things, I could probably go on longer, but welcome, Rusty. We are so stoked to have you here today.
Thank you, Mike. I feel like you're stoked and happy for me to be here. I'm like, are you sure you're not just going to the bottom of the barrel? You've run out of people. You finally come around to me.
Absolutely. No, we're just getting started, man. We're just getting started.
All right. Okay.
So I love how I'm going to steal the quote that you already gave me when I asked you how you are. And you said, hey, I'm staying positive but testing negative. But that's a good lead in just to get us going. Like I just think of your wisdom and perspective. Where are we right now? Just state of the state in this country.
Yeah, I mean it's a crazy time, obviously. I'm a bit of a glass is always, overflowing guy. There's actually four kinds of glasses. We always talk about the glass is half full and the glass is half empty. There is the glass is overflowing guy, and that's not always the greatest place to be because you can be overly optimistic, but that's me. Then there's the glass is half full, then there's the glass is half empty, and then there are those who believe the glass is out to kill you. And there are those that are on that spectrum, into the spectrum right now too, that they think the world is, so upside down, that we as a country have so many issues to get through. And then there's the global impact of the pandemic that they're kind of walking around with their heads down. And I'm not that way. I see some real issues, but I think that we have reasons to be hopeful.
So give us a little perspective from your point of view on the state of the state for the American worker. And I know out here in Silicon Valley, we sometimes get lost in our usual, which I don't think is a good reflection of the rest of the world. But what's your point of view?
I think that if you are a knowledge worker, things feel pretty good, right? I mean, I like this. I may not dig the whole idea that I'm having to, school at home and do those kinds of things. But I've not had the worst year if I'm a knowledge worker. If I'm skilled labor or unskilled labor, it's been tough. And I think that what we're seeing here is, if I was putting this into terms of, I was your stockbroker, I would tell you, for knowledge workers, I would say buy, you should buy. For skilled labor, I'd say it looks good, but hold. And for unskilled labor, I'd say it's time to sell. Because the idea that things are going to come back as fast as we want to on this unskilled side, and that it's going to look anything like the normal that we had, prior to a year ago in February of 2020, I don't see that normality for a while. So it's schizophrenic.
When you joined our Crosschq advisory team, you said to me, look, it's our moral obligation to get this thing right, and getting the thing right of kind of leveling the playing field and making certain that we get the right talent and the right jobs. What do you think of our moral obligation today to deal with the issue that you just brought up as talent leaders?
Well, I do think we have a bigger responsibility than we probably allow ourselves to recognize. Where we can, like if we're a head of HR, head of talent in an organization, and we've got an opportunity to level the playing field, we should level the playing field. right? We should make sure that we are lowering barriers, lowering artificial friction points for those who are trying to work their way into either skill, go from unskilled to skilled or skilled to knowledge. And I think we owe that to people. I also think that we owe it to it's a long-term game that we're playing here. And we may talk about this later on, but you know, I I recently heard a quote from someone who said, my dad would have been a better dad if he'd had a better boss. Let that sink in for a second, right? So I think that, the impact that we're having when we have a chance to lead an organization or allow people to thrive, flourish, or move up into a place that they weren't able to get to before, even if it's painful for us, right? It's like uncomfortable to say, well, what if they fail? Well, why not give them the chance? I think that has a generational impact. I think that, back home, somebody's going to go home and say, hey, my company just gave me an opportunity. And someone's going to, some kid's going to lodge that in the back of their head and go, oh, that's pretty cool. Mom just got a brand new opportunity because the company, that did that. Mom comes home and says, you know what? I keep getting shut out of everything. I can't move forward. We're going to really struggle. You don't think that lodges in a kid's head? Lodges in a kid's head. So I think we have, generational impact here as
What's
well.
fascinating is we're doing a bunch of work with Allegis, and they have a focused effort on reskilling and getting folks back into the workforce right up the middle for what you're talking about. One of the things that they have identified as the biggest gap is they can do their job to get the individual reskilled and ready to rock, but they can't get them an interview. And so I'm curious in terms of your
Mm.
point of view on how we need to kind of smash those paradigms within our organizations, whether the will is there, but the action isn't necessarily there to support.
Yeah. Well, look, if the will is there, so I'm a little cynical when it comes to this because people talk a big game, and then they say, "Oh yeah, we want to do this and we don't want to do this." Well, you know what? Words are great, and I like to espouse my words as much as anybody else. But what really matters is my actions, right? So if I'm sitting there saying that, hey, you know what? Yes, we're going to diversify our workforce. We're going to broaden our workforce. We're going to give our workforce new chances. But we have these barriers that people can't get an interview or they get an interview and they don't get any feedback or they don't get heard. They never hear from them again once they try to apply to the company. Then, those words are cheap. They're really cheap. And I read a great quote the other day, and I'm going to pull it up because my friend Terry McBride, who runs network music in Canada, has it as his signature line. But listen to this quote. At some point, this crisis will end, and the memories of how people conduct their business will resonate well into the future. Okay? So if we are talking a game but not walking the talk, if we're not giving people the chances that they need to have, if we're not opening up the aperture of what we see as a possibility and potential in people, those memories will resonate. We're companies right now are establishing their employment brand. History is not all the stuff that we did 100 years ago. Yeah, that's history. History is what we did yesterday. So we're making our own history for our companies and for ourselves by what we're doing right now, right? What we'll do tomorrow will be the day after, will be history. So, this is a chance, for us to change that, to pivot, to do the right things if we so choose to do so.
Yeah, and using that as a segue to kind of our next topic, I think you had a fascinating year last year, and obviously you've been heavily involved in politics and helping certainly President Obama with as an appointee. That guy
That guy,
behind you,
that guy.
and then also more recently helping in Biden's efforts, President Biden's efforts. You gave a quote in 2018 that I looked up around just a fundamental yearning for a kinder and gentler approach to politics. And I always, when I think of you, it was like one of those quotes that sort of reflected. But I am curious, what got you off the bench to get in the game in 2020? And I think we'd love to hear your view on what was happening at the kitchen tables in America over the last year during that political cycle.
Yeah, sure. I first, I knew nothing about politics really, when I was, before I got a call in August of 2011 that said, "Hey, would you come to Chicago tomorrow? Because we're going to start this new thing and we think you can run it." I'm like, go to Chicago tomorrow? I said to my wife, I got to go to Chicago tomorrow because, I'm going to President Obama's headquarters for his reelect. And she goes, "What, why?" And I said, "I don't really know. But, when the president's people call, you do what you're supposed to do." Um, and so that turned into an opportunity to lead really the first big affiliate group from the technology community for the 2012 reelect called Tech for Obama, which was a blast. And, it was one of those interesting things that like people wanted to say, "Hey, how do I get involved in politics and do what you've done?" And I said, well, a lot of things have to come to play about that. One, you have to have the time. So I was very fortunate to be able to have the time at that point to jump in. You have to have some skills. You've got to be able to influence. You've got to be able to communicate. You've got to be able to be organized. Political campaigns are not like any other piece of organization or business that you would know of. Maybe the only other thing I might think about is like what happens in a surgery, an operating table, where both of them are time limited, right? You just can't, you don't get to do it forever. And you have to be very, very precise in what you do. So a political campaign, you don't get to slip the deadline, the ship date, right? You can't go, "Oh, gosh, November 4th is not going to work. Why don't we do November 14th?" It doesn't work that way. So everything runs in a very precise manner, and so you have to be able to be very organized, in fact, and be organized in yourself. And then in my particular case, because of what I was being asked to do, which was to go out and engage people to, one, feel like that they belong. So to get, secondly, to activate them, and thirdly, to fundraise from them and through them. It takes a lot of leading from behind. It takes a lot of humility, because you're never the star. There's only one star. The one star, in that case was President Obama, and most recently now President Biden. So I was very fortunate. I got kind of pushed up into something, learned on my way, succeeded enough that in 2019 the Biden campaign came to me and said, early in the primaries, and said, "Hey, would you do this again for us, as you did prior?" And so I jumped in on the leadership team of innovators for Biden. And I was really happy to be able to do that, with a successful outcome for the president.
Let's double click a little bit into the trust issue and the kind of polarization issue for our talent leaders. I mean, it's
Yeah.
man, I will just tell you within our company, even, balancing good, honest, open dialogue with there is a point when it gets to be less good. And I'm just curious, how do you think about counseling our talent leaders who are trying to navigate those waters now?
Well, I mean, it's a great question because what happens in culture and society, finds its way into the workplace. When I was growing up, my mom and dad, it used to say to me, he said, "If you're doing it at home, you're doing it at school." And that was true, right? If I'm misbehaving and I'm talking back, to them, then I'm doing it at school too, and I'm treating my teachers the same way. So there's a lot of this, if you think that there's an institutional failure of trust, what is an institution? A corporation. What do leaders represent in that corporation? They represent the mouthpiece of the institution. So if I can't trust institutions, why should I trust my company? Right? Not to mention, I mean, we could have a long discussion on transfer of power. Right. So now we've seen this whole, outside of the walls and in the world about, that power corrupts, and we know that, absolute power is corrupts, and we see example after example after example of that, and after a while, you start to look at it and you say, who's in power around here? Well, my boss's boss, my boss's boss's boss, the CEO, the board, right? And you begin to question the power, and then you begin to say, "What is my power to do this?" And power is a very fascinating thing because power is typically never given. Power is taken, right? So we don't give up power. Power is taken from us. So if I'm sitting there and I feel powerless, I will try to take the power and bring it back to me. And so I think, forget, what we talked about as millennials, or forget about, categorizing people by the decade they were born in. Let's just stop here and say, in America, this time frame of being influenced by all of these outside forces is makes a difference in the workplace. So what do we have to do? We have to over over communicate and over work to build trust. Like if you can't earn the trust, used to be, and I think it's probably still true, but used to be that it was, the place that people trusted the most was their direct supervisor. Any of the other messages down, you sort of would weed out and do it. But I trusted my exact super. Look, if we lose that, then what do we have in the workplace,
It's such a thing.
right?
I mean, the data is coming out screamingly on this that we're doing such a poor job of onboarding our talent in this remote work world. And subsequently, this idea of building culture and ultimately building trust is extraordinarily challenging. We're if you think about it from that perspective,
It
any
is.
point.
It is. But part of that is, Mike. So my model now is, we grew up, all of us, in a hub and spoke model. So the hub was the headquarters, right? And that was where the leadership was. And if you wanted to get ahead, you went to the hub, right? And then we had spokes that got created. Those were sales office, operations offices, manufacturing plants, customer service centers, tech centers, and regional offices. And they became little microcosms of the hub, right? And we tried to duplicate the culture and try to do as much as we could in those hubs. And then last year we blew it all up. Now there's no hubs, there's no spoke. We're all nodes. We're just nodes, right? So all of these nodes need their support system. They need to be taken care of. So we might be getting to a place, and this is the beautiful thing about technology, is that we can, is that one size does not have to fit all. Now we can really start to think about one size fits one. The other cool thing we got going on, Mike, is like, in that manufacturing plant in Orlando, Florida, people there would have never known somebody in the customer support center in Seattle.
Huh.
Just never would have happened. Those two spokes, there would be no cross pollination whatsoever. But now they can. Now we do. And so now is the opportunity. If anybody's listening who has any sense of machine learning and artificial intelligence of the future, jump on this concept because we can't have enough of it. The fact is that we work for people, not for companies. And we leave companies and we stay for people. So when we have affiliation, it makes a huge difference. And we see that when somebody's in a spoke or when they're in the hub. But when they're out there as nodes, where are our affiliations? Well, it could be that the person in Orlando and the person in Seattle, they both love jazz music, right? And now we can connect them in with other people who love jazz music. And guess what? Here's a Thursday night jazz session.
That's awesome.
But see, we have to know those things about people, right? We've got to take the time and effort to know people below the surface, the random, the unknown things that are people's passions, their desires, their dreams. And we can now take that and put it all together and go, well, I guess I could leave this company and go to the next company, but I wouldn't have those Thursday night jazz things,
That's awesome.
right? And I totally dig my friends in the
For
jazz
sure.
club. So I think, you know, I think there's lots of things that we can do as leaders of organizations, as talent leaders, as
Oh, that is
CHROs.
awesome. All right, and there are probably a dozen different subtopics we could have got into on every one of those tracks. I just want to, as we kind of wrap up, back to your four different glass types. Listen,
Yeah.
give the audience kind of some insight into what gives you, sitting here on March 2nd, 2021. What gives you the most hope and optimism about the next phase in our collective journey here?
So I did. So I decided a couple of months ago that I would go back and I would try to find every picture I could find from 1920. Okay, and there happened to be a very big event in late 1919 and 1920, because remember we had the pandemic in 1918, 1919. 1919 was actually worse than 1918, and one of the big events was the women's suffrage movement, right? And it was a woman's right to vote was passed. If you go back and research every single picture you're going to find, you will not find anybody with a mask, and you won't find anybody social distancing. You will see people hugging, and they're hanging out, and they're marching together, arm in arm, and they're celebrating. And I think if history tells us something, it's a glimpse to the future, right? And there was a reason it was called the Roaring Twenties, right? Because people came through something and they were all pent up, and they went through these fears, and they went through death and misery and grief. And then on the backside of it, because we're human beings, we don't want to wallow in that. We're not pigs. We don't like to stay in the sty, in the mud. We want to get out of it, and we want to thrive. And so I think the human spirit, is one thing that has me very, very hopeful. I think that we're going to be more open to changes that drive our economy, that drive changes for us to lead in areas. I'm hopeful that we'll see something about infrastructure in our country that would make us proud again, about our airports and our train stations and our roads and all the things, and the superhighway, that everybody in America should have broadband, and that should just be a right, not a privilege.
So good for having you here today. And like I said, there's a ton of topics that we could go deeper on. I'm afraid we're a little out of time. I did love a couple of things that you said. One that stuck out for me is this idea of leading from behind. We sometimes forget how important that is. I also think the comment you made about, yeah, history is history, but we're making history every single day. So starting here on March 2nd, 2021, we're creating this next wave of history. So I think there's a whole bunch of inspiration from you today. I appreciate you taking the time and joining us for our Crosschq check-in. Again, I am Mike Fitzsimmons signing off here from Crosschq. Thanks for taking the time to hear our story and meet Rusty. Take it easy. Bye.